Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, Hawaiians in the United States are coming to grips with a false missile alarm. Is solving the DPRK crisis the most effective way in bringing calm back to Hawaii? And I speak with David Aikman, the managing director of the World Economic Forum. He explains how a forum like Davos can be devoted to globalization at a time when populism thrives. Now let's quickly jump to the first topic of our discussion today. Ever since the DPRK began expanding the range of its missiles, Hawaii has been at the front line of the United States. Just last Saturday, terror and anger were triggered in Hawaii after a false emergency alert for a ballistic missile was sent out. Despite an apology from the state government officials, residents are demanding more answers and urge actions at the federal level to solve the DPRK crisis.
An alert that broke the peace in Hawaii. Residents received a government warning on their phones which told them to seek immediate shelter due to an incoming ballistic missile threat. The island fell into huge panic with people rushing to safety. Some abandoned cars on the highway, others gathered at home to wait for what seemed like an inevitable blast.
My brother was just about to leave for his class, and he told us that he got a threat on his phone. It said there's a bomb threat, a ballistic missile threat, and so we all freaked out.
Part of the message that made me panic was, this is not a drill. And I went into mama bear mode.
The disorder and confusion lasted some 40 minutes until a second alert said it was a false alarm. Authorities immediately apologized and blamed the incident on human error.
This should not have happened. We are investigating the sequence of events that occurred. An error was made in emergency management, which allowed this false alarm to be sent.
The fallout of this incident is still lingering. Residents are demanding more accountability on the cause of the error. Some officials have also urged U.S. President Donald Trump to directly negotiate with the DPRK to thoroughly remove such a threat. This incident has since sparked worries that U.S. residents may not take future government warnings seriously, even the real ones.
To find out more about Hawaii's false alarm and its implications about how the DPRK issue is being looked at by the rest of the world, let's turn to our panel. Joining us in Beijing studio, Zhao Tong, who is a fellow in the Carnegie's Nuclear Policy Program based at the Carnegie's Tsinghua Center for Global Policy. Welcome to our program, sir. Also from Boston in the United States, Jim Walsh, Security Studies Program, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Welcome back, sir, to our program. Also welcome back in Moscow, Russia, Dmitry Barbich, political analyst from Sputnik International News Agency. Good to see you as well. Let me start with you, Mr. Walsh. You are not living in Hawaii. Congratulations. So you didn't have to suffer that half hour of extreme fear.
That's
but
right.
Tell us exactly what went wrong and can that system be fixed?
Well, what went wrong is that they had a very simple notification system using a computer where there was a drop-down box and the operator could select drill or actual warning, and he selected the wrong thing with his mouse. He's clicked on the wrong button, and it set off this deeply regrettable incident. As to your second question, which is the more important one, can it be fixed? Yes, it should be fixed by not doing this. They should not be having an alert system at all. There is no defense against nuclear weapons. When you read their own suggestions on the Hawaii Civil Defense website, they say, if you're driving, pull over and your car safely by the side of the road and then lie on the floor of your car. I can tell you, as a nuclear expert, that will do nothing. That will do nothing to save you or protect you. There is no defense against nuclear weapons.
Okay.
The U.S. learned that in the 1960s when it shut down its civil defense program, but we appear to have forgotten the lessons of the Cold War.
The lessons of the Cold War is not only about this false alarm. It is much more than that. Mr. Zhao here in Beijing. there were mistakes made earlier, even though none of those mistakes eventually was corrected, quote unquote, by real action, which is fortunate. But help us understand what were some of those earlier mistakes, some of the so-called warning, and the possible actions could be taken by the United States in response to those warnings.
Yes, we need to know that technologies will make mistakes, humans will make mistakes. The American nuclear system really depends on a range of sensors, such as satellites in outer space, ground-based radars for detecting enemy missile launch. And the American nuclear strategy demands that if there is a detection of enemy missile launch, the U.S. president should seriously consider immediately launching the nuclear weapons before the enemy missile detonate over its homeland. And under that nuclear posture, there were numerous cases in Cold War where technology errors, human errors almost led to an unnecessary nuclear war.
Give us some of those specific examples so people really understand what we are talking about here. It's not something like a drop of a feather, but something very serious. Sir, go ahead.
Right. In 1979, there was exercise tape that was mistakenly fed into the computer system of the North American Aerospace Defense Command. And that simulated a massive Soviet missile attack, which was not real, but was taken as a real threat. And the threat was reported to Brzezinski, the national security advisor of President Carter, and just before Brzezinski was about to pick up the phone to call the president to recommend a massive nuclear retaliation
against the former Soviet Union.
Right, there came a third message telling him that it was a false alarm. So that was a close call. And also during
if the action were taken, what would it mean?
It means the U.S. would launch hundreds, if not thousands, of nuclear missiles towards the Soviet Union, totally in mistake.
Right.
And after struck by nuclear weapons,
yes,
the Soviet will for sure launch its nuclear weapons back on the United States. So it's a mutual destruction scenario.
Got it.
And also during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, at that time the Americans also deployed some nuclear missiles in Okinawa, Japan. And in one morning, the American military officer mistakenly transmitted authentic and real nuclear launch order codes to its missile operators.
I see.
And the missile operators were ordered to launch their nuclear missiles according to the pre-programmed targets, which means China, North Korea, and Vietnam was almost mistakenly struck by nuclear missiles for no good reason.
Right.
And that mistake was only prevented in the last minute. So there are many close calls in history, and we don't know some of these incidents until very recently.
This is the extreme danger that we are talking about. The reason that we are doing this discussion is not just about the false alarm itself or how Hawaiians are being scared, but rather what does it mean when mistakes are being made by any of those interest parties and eventually have a mutual discussion for everybody involved, particularly in northeastern part of Asia. Let me go to you, Mr. Barbish. Of course, the former USSR has been decades old already for us, you know, people that are of the 60s, 70s, and 80s generation. But talk about the possibility of mistake related to a nuclear war is nothing that we should just brush it off. Mr. Barbish.
You're absolutely right, and I want to agree with Jim Walsh and with Tao Zhang that there is no protection from a nuclear weapon, and mistakes can be deadly in this sphere. But also these mistakes, they're especially painful and they're especially dangerous when they happen on the background of increased tensions between countries. We all know the context of the U.S.-North Korean relations, if I can call this relations, in the last few months. That's why this false alarm was so painful. And it's not just Mr. Trump's fiery rhetoric, you know, him talking about fire and fury. I would say that the whole ideology of regime change, when people can expect sudden military strikes from the United States, from other so-called democracies, in order to make other countries better, make them change their regimes. This creates a situation of uncertainty. For example, take the story with Libya. You know, Colonel Gaddafi, thank God, destroyed his weapons of mass destruction just a few years before the war.
Mr. Barbish, we can focus on the nuclear issue if we can. But talking about this danger, there are things that all sides are trying to do in order to make sure the nuclear issue is going to be contained rather than spreading around even further. But Mr. Zhao, at this point, we see some events going on parallel. North and South Korea are talking to one another, should be applauded. But at the same time, in British Columbia, those countries that used to support the United States in the Korea War are gathering together, and without the participation of China and Russia. People say this is confusing because you don't have interest parties all involved. What kinds of results can you have? You also have China's president talking to the U.S. president, also parallel while everything is going on. So you have all these different signs putting to positive direction, negative direction, pulling our attention in different ways. What is going on, Mr. Zhao?
Yes, I mean, the U.S. has been emphasizing international unity against North Korea, but its recent practice regarding the Vancouver conference against North Korea doesn't fall in line with its rhetoric policy.
What do you mean that they are not falling in line with the rhetoric policy? They say we are putting pressure, we want more sanctions, so that North Korea would think about the options that they have and therefore move to denuclearization. That's their argument.
Yeah, the U.S. always wants China on board with its North Korean strategy, but as far as I know, Canada, initially the co-host of the conference, extended an unofficial invitation to China to attend. But then the United States intervened, and it wanted the conferences to focus on the maximum pressure strategy. It doesn't want the discussion to be distracted, doesn't want to discuss the Russian or the Chinese double suspension strategy. So that's clearly a signal that the U.S. only wants to resolve important national security issues through its own coalition of so-called like-minded countries, and doesn't want to really hear different voices. I think that's a recipe for disaster.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Walsh? Is that about the like-minded people getting together? China and Russia certainly are not like-minded.
Well, I agree that we're sort of in between and betwixt right now. What do I mean by that? On the one hand, we have what seems to be the possibility of improved relations between North Korea and South Korea around the Olympics and the symphony visit and all of that. At the same time, the international community is trying to build and hold on to this sanctions architecture that it's built. It doesn't want to see that dissolve just because the two parties are starting to talk a little bit, because if it dissolves and then things return back to the way they were, you have to start all over. So it is a balancing act right now. Let me finally add, related directly to what we've been discussing, that today Japan had a false alarm.
That's right.
NHK had to apologize for saying that there was an alert. And also, you know, we're thinking about how the U.S. can make mistakes, and it has in the past. Remember that North Korea is a brand new nuclear weapon state. It does not have all the doctrine and all the practice and experience and safeguards that you would expect or hope for in a nuclear weapon state. So when we think about false alarms and mistakes, we should also be thinking about North Korea and the mistakes they may make as a brand new, inexperienced nuclear weapon state.
And that is why the negotiations are going on in order to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula, which should be the ultimate goal. Mr. Barbish, but on that point about where are we going from here, what do you say? You heard about the president of China and the United States talking to each other on the phone, talking about it's getting positive direction, and they want to sustain the momentum of this trend. Mr. Barbish, what needs to be done from your perspective?
Well, I think that the positive development between North Korea and South Korea is to be encouraged. We in Russia, we feel very bitter about the fact that the North Korean team may go to the Olympic Games in South Korea, and the Russian team won't be able to go, even though obviously North Korea is a much more closed state, and of course checking these people for doping is a lot more difficult than checking Russian athletes, but we have acquiesced to that because we want contacts, we want success between South Korea and North Korea. What is being discussed in Vancouver today, I think, is indeed counterproductive, and that was stressed by the Russian foreign minister yesterday, because right at the moment when we have a glimmer of hope between North Korea and South Korea, the former participants in the Korean War, or on Seoul's side, they're meeting in Vancouver in order to discuss sanctions and enforcing sanctions against North Korea. These sanctions, they include not just the prohibition of selling weapons to North Korea, they also include the possible prohibition of deliveries of fuel to this rather small and pretty cold country. That can lead to a humanitarian disaster. Wow. And when you have a disaster, you can have inadvertent wars, because people may be just driven desperate.
Okay, when it comes to
of course, what is to be done, I think it can be summarized in one word: detente, you know, de-escalation. That's what we need right now.
Okay.
We need to step away from the dangerous rhetoric which made this false alarm so tedious for people in Hawaii.
De-escalation, what needs to be done? Mr. Zhao, from your perspective, are we increasing our hope of solving the problem, or are we diluting the current, a little promising trend that we are seeing right now, Mr. Zhao?
I think basically we are facing two objectives. One is to increasing the pressure to force North Korea to make major concessions. The other objective is to reduce the risk of an incidental nuclear exchange with North Korea. And sometimes these two objectives work against each other. And
explain, please.
In order to make North Korea make major concessions, you have to make sure to North Korea that it understands that the real risk of a military strike against it is very high. Therefore, North Korea, you should probably think very seriously of making concessions. Otherwise, you have to face this real risk of military strike. But at the same time, an increasing level of military strike also increases the chances of mistakes leading to incidental nuclear war. So the reason why the Hawaii forced alert became such an issue is precisely because it took place against a background of very high tensions. If it happened in a peacetime, no one will be concerned. Everyone will know immediately it's a false alarm. So it's highly important for everyone to know at this point that it's equally important to prevent an incidental nuclear war as to denuclearizing North Korea.
Got it.
I think countries need to reach basic consensus on this priority.
We've been reading stories of people in Hawaii, how they are functioning themselves within those 30 minutes, which is very fearful for them, how they were contacting their friends and relatives, how they felt about the world after that 30 minutes of fear and extreme danger. Mr. Walsh, what can we learn about what we really want for our world on this issue of the DPRK nuclear issue, on the issue of how parties have to work together so that nothing like that has to happen?
Well, for those 30 minutes in Hawaii, this discussion of a possible conflict with North Korea was not theoretical. They honestly believed that it was real. And it serves as sort of a dress rehearsal, if you will. This is serious business. And, you know, the pundits talk back and forth, but if there were actually a war, it would be unimaginable, the consequences. And I think, as I said, I think the whole idea of having this civil defense system is stupid. And we seem to have forgotten the lessons of the past. But the consequences are real. You know, when there are terror attacks, I've studied this, there can be psychological injury. I am sure there are people in Hawaii, expectant mothers, children of a certain age, people who have pre-existing mental health challenges. These people were injured by this, and they will be suffering the consequences of this for some years to come. And so that's why having a system that yields no benefits whatsoever, but only scares the hell out of people and causes psychological injury, we really have to rethink that. The Hawaiians have to go back to the drawing board, and I would urge them to scrap the whole system.
We have talked a lot, gentlemen. We have talked a lot before as well, but this issue, the Hawaii false alarm, is not an incident of its own, but rather it is an incident that should provoke further deep thoughts from all parties about what kinds of world, and especially this region, that we really want, and how can we make that happen. Thank you so much for the three of you for being with us, gentlemen. Zhao Tong, Jim Walsh, and Dmitry Barbish. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. I speak with David Aikman, the Managing Director of the World Economic Forum here in China. He explains how a forum like Davos can promote globalization in a fractured world. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. The World Economic Forum in Davos is to be held 23rd to the 26th of this month. The Chinese representatives will also join the forum. In such a fractured world, can the conference mend fences and solicit consensus? Apparently, people from all over the world are ready to try at the Swiss winter resort. I recently sat down with David Aikman, Chief Representative Officer in China and Managing Director of the World Economic Forum. He shared his insights of globalization and what this year's Davos is likely to be about.
Creating a shared future in a fractured world. That is this year's theme at the World Economic Forum in Davos, continually calling on the international community to cooperate on tackling major global challenges. However, where is globalization heading? There has been a lot of pushback against globalization. That is what Brexit was all about. That is what Trump's America First is all about. At last year's Davos, Chinese President Xi Jinping vowed to open doors and to reject trade wars and protectionism. That's a robust defense of globalization. Davos is a platform where different perspectives converge. It is an annual event where political leaders, economists, academics, technology pioneers gather to devise a shared future.
Mr. Aikman, welcome to CGTN.
Thank you, Tian Wei. It's great to be with you again.
Fractured world, that's the theme of this year. But the question is, after this meeting, will there be any consensus?
Well, I think this year's theme really reflects what's going on in the world, you know, and we need to come together and find a way of working forward, despite the fact that we're in a multipolar world, different views, different values, and even divisions within society, within countries. But there is hope. You know, we've seen with climate change, with the Sustainability Development Goals, the world can come together around shared interests. And so that's what we're going to be trying to push this week, next week in Davos. You're
going to push very hard because there are a lot of heads of states, actually unprecedented number, going to Davos this year. Tell us more about that.
That's right. We have over 60 heads of state and heads of government. And you have to remember, you know, the annual meeting starting at the beginning of the year is the way for people to look forward. So Justin Trudeau will be there outlining the agenda for the G7. President Macri from Argentina will be there outlining the G20 agenda. I think we have maybe 5 of the 7 G7 countries present. We also have Brazil and India, you know, representing the BRICS and representing the G20. So really, I think we see these different worldviews and all of these different important players.
And you have Donald Trump there too.
Donald Trump will be coming, yes. I think people are very excited to hear from him directly about his America First agenda and what that means for them.
But was that a surprise to the forum?
Well, I think the fact that he's coming to engage with the international community is a very positive sign. Davos is all about dialogue and exchange. We don't always have to have the same views, but we have to come together and exchange ideas and try and find a common way forward.
People wonder whether Davos is going to be big enough for all the security guards and all the security measures.
Well, right now we're trying to tell people if you don't have a hotel, better not come.
That's a great advice, I would say.
It's really full.
Yeah, but having said that, though, the question that we are seeing these days is that we are all stick to our own mentality. We do not want to change. Many wonder whether this Davos is going to bring people together or make it even clearer that the world is ever fractured than before.
I think President Xi said it very well when he participated in Davos last year. He said increasingly we're seeing people who seek to prosper at the expense of others. And this is where we need to find a new way forward. We can't have this kind of breakdown in the social contract, even within countries. So Professor Schwab, our founder and executive chairman, has been talking recently, in addition to the kind of quantitative easing that we have seen, which is now spurring some economic growth, we need qualitative easing. We need some sort of new social contract which can help address the people who are being left behind and have a much better globalization, a much more equitable globalization. It's going to be one of the big topics next week.
That is within societies, but what about international community? I mean, there is a very different understanding about how the world should be run in the future. People, some of them, tend to look internally. Others still believe that the international community, when working together under certain kind of mechanism, will come up with better results for everybody. So there is a sea divide of ideologies here. The question, once again, I want to come back to you, David, is this Davos, this time, it's going to be particularly intense because the debate is really reaching a level.
I think that's right, and I think this coming to grips with a multipolar world is something that all leaders are struggling with. There used to be, a sort of Washington consensus about the direction that global, liberalization was going, and that we've seen the limits of that model. We've seen that break down with very different world concepts about how global governance should happen. Very different values undermining decisions around cyber sovereignty or economic exchange. And we need to recognize that even though we may not have shared values, we have shared interests. If you take things like climate change, or if you take, trying to make the current economic growth more sustainable, these are common interests, and we may have different systems, we may have different values, but we need to find a way to work together to create more inclusive prosperity for all.
Last year, Chinese President Xi Jinping was there, and he made a, shall we say, an outstanding speech, and certainly claimed to the international community about China's stance. That was applauded by members of participants at last year's Davos. 1 year on, how do you, as the head of the World Economic Forum here in China, see that speech and the significance of it? Meanwhile, how much still needs to be done by all sides?
I think you're right. The speech by President Xi Jinping last year was truly historic. And what I was very heartened to see was that throughout the year, at the major global events where China was engaged, whether it was hosting the Belt and Road Forum or whether it was President Xi speaking at the G20 or APEC, that message of continued engagement and the support of the international rules-based order was a consistent message and a consistent theme right up until the President's end-of-year address to the nation. And so I think clearly China is a driving force in terms of making sure that globalization continues to work for everyone. Nonetheless, there are real challenges, not just here in China or between China and other trading nations, but there are real challenges in that system to make sure that it really addresses all members of society. And this is something where we're putting forward a call to action to try and make globalization work for everyone, because we don't feel you can have social progress and society can't really improve and continue forward if we don't have that economic growth and development. You need that growth to underpin, support everything from infrastructure development to investment in schools and education. Society really can't move forward unless you have that economic progress. But it can't be economic progress at any cost. We need to be much more open and inclusive.
I remember last year when I was there listening to President Xi's speech, a lot of people around me talk about this speech and what he said, and people believe China at that moment and on is coming to the center of the world stage. But people wonder this time, the Chinese president is not going. So what is going to be China's role during the World Economic Forum this year? When it comes to business, when it comes to policy forming, when it comes to ideological discussions, when it comes to world challenges, where is China going to be this year?
Well, we're really pleased that China is maintaining a very high-level engagement. So we're looking forward to welcoming Liu He, Politburo member, and also the head of the office on the leading affairs. I'm not sure in English what it's called.
The
Central
economic
Council of Leading on Economic and Financial Affairs. So Liu He will be joining us, and I think people are really interested in hearing from him on an insider's view, not only on the Chinese economy and what's happening domestically, and maybe all of the transformations and reforms that people don't see yet, but also what will China's foreign economic policy be? How is China really going to engage on an economic basis worldwide? But he's joined not only by other key ministers and vice ministers from commerce and trade and the state-owned enterprises. We have, I think, 10 state-owned enterprises joining, as well as 30 private companies.
Congratulations.
So, you know, we have really all of the big and innovative companies, you know, representing China this year. So we think that China's engagement is sustained and continued. In fact, it's even higher participation from China than last year.
Congratulations. Good work, I guess, from the China office. Having said that, though, Davos, the World Economic Forum there, is facing two challenges, or shall I say two opportunities at the same time. On the one hand, you've got the geopolitical change, as well as we talked about, the so-called national interest, different views about it. On the other hand, you also got the fourth industrial revolution, which Professor Schwab has been talked about intensively in his two books. So when these two combine together, what kind of task and opportunity is it presenting to the World Economic Forum?
Well, certainly I think this multipolar world should be actually welcomed. We should recognize that in diversity, we may have more creative solutions and more helpful perspectives that can help us figure our way out of this new model. I think where leaders are really confounded, I guess I would say the word is with the technological changes taking place that you referenced. Technology is moving at such a pace that it's quite difficult to figure out how to regulate or how to control or how to encourage certain technologies which could benefit society. So, for example, we see the power of new industries like artificial intelligence or robotics to transform economies and create new sectors of the economy, for example, in China. That's why China has identified these industries as strategic areas where they want to invest. At the same time, there are potential social consequences of eliminating jobs or changing the way in which we need to educate our young people for the jobs of the future.
The issue of privacy, for example, also.
Absolutely.
The issue of governance as well.
So one of the things we'll be doing at this year's annual meeting is a specific series on agile governance. There's a whole pillar around getting regulators, academics, and technologists together to see how would we try to regulate and create light touch policies and protocols to handle technologies like 3D printing and advanced manufacturing or artificial intelligence in a way that could foster the innovation needed to create that economic boost, but also try and mitigate some of the potential downside societal risks from those technologies.
Every year in Davos, you will see different opinions, particularly those that are not participants. So how Davos World Economic Forum see itself today? What kind of platform? What is the nature of you today?
Well, as an international organization for public-private partnership, our core belief, our core mission is that the challenges in society cannot be solved by one stakeholder of society alone. Government alone can't do it. Private sector alone can't do it. We need the different parts of society coming together to work on these global challenges.
But people will say, well, these a few thousand rich and powerful be really, genuine and figure out the solution for those who are not.
So what we try to gather in Davos is really a representation of all society. So it's not just the rich and powerful. We have labor union leaders. We have young people from the age of 25 up to 35. We have academics. We have NGO leaders. We have social entrepreneurs who are working with people at really the bottom of the economic pyramid. And of the 3,000 participants, we really have a mix of all parts of society. And the reason why we try to engage certain people and perhaps not others is we really focus on decision makers. We really focus on people who have the ability to affect change and to make a difference. And I would say what we've done, I think very consciously over the years as well, is really opened up the World Economic Forum in terms of live casting, broadcasting, creating the open forum where we have citizens who come and sit on panels and discuss and debate with participants. So, in all those ways we try to make the annual meeting as open, inclusive, and also representative as possible, while still recognizing the fact that you have to have security, you have to have access, because you have very important leaders attending there. So it's a delicate balance, but it's one which I think the World Economic Forum faces in a very open and transparent way.
This year is going to be a very important year for China. After the 19th Party Congress, this is the very first year to implement all those goals. And this is also the year to set up the real blueprint about implementation as well. So, David, how much inspiration do you think those that are coming from China, whether they are coming from business or, societal groups or coming from the government, be able to draw from this year's World Economic Forum? How much can they also contribute to the real discussion?
Well, I think it's interesting. Many of the themes that came out of the 19th Party Congress around really trying to address poverty, address environmental issues and climate change, thinking about how to make the economy more innovative. These are topics which are going to be discussed next week in Davos.
Yes.
And I think what's very clear is China's own domestic goals are very congruent with the international planetary goals that we have. All of the efforts that China is doing to eradicate poverty, these are challenges that are not unique to China. These are being faced in all countries, not just high income, middle income, low income countries. This inequality in society, this increasing tension between the haves and the have-nots is not unique to China. But I think China's ambitions and China's plans can be helped by engagement internationally, can be helped by further opening up and exchange. And I think what many leaders will be looking to hear from their Chinese counterparts will be, how is China progressing along the path? How will new sectors like the financial services open up for competition and reform? Because I think increasingly, as goes China, so goes the world.
David, what a pleasure to see you again.
Thank you, Tian Wei.
All the best for this year's World Economic Forum in Davos.
And good luck to you too.
Thank you, sir. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.